we also need to think about quality and TMF really being almost twins. They need to go together. The quality system defines what we should do, and the TMF presents what we did. And so they really do need to connect. And so I know that even from a CDISC TMF reference model standpoint, we're sort of thinking about, well, how can we collaborate more with the people on the quality side of things, with, like, for example, the Society of Quality Assurance. Is there collaborations that we can put together to start to connect the dots on these two areas? So just as an introduction, today I'm joined with Donatella Ballerini, who's got a lot of experience in obviously TMF management, but also within GCP and clinical quality. And so it's very interesting to have both of those hats, almost two sides of the same house. She's going to bring her insights from her experience working in the industry, but also working with Montreal clients on some of these topics. I'm Paul Fenton-Carter, CEO of Montreal. I'm hosting today's session. Also very passionate about quality and TMF. Have quite a long career focusing on quality within clinical trials, and really excited to engage with Donatella today on this topic. So with that, let's get started.
So are you still there? You are not in the wrong place. Don't worry. This is still a podcast on TMF, quality, GCP compliance. You are in the right place. Don't worry. Okay. So I think that probably you all are, the plot of this movie. I mean, this is a scene from Jurassic World, a very famous movie. And the plot, I think, is quite well known. So basically, it's a group of brilliant scientists that were able to clone from an ancient DNA dinosaurs. So, I mean, a big project. They succeed in cloning dinosaurs, and I think that my children would be very happy to see a real dinosaur. But they didn't think about the consequences of having big dinosaurs in real world, the impact of these big animals on our environment. So they did implement quality by design, to be honest, because they just focus on the project, they just focus on cloning dinosaurs, and they succeed, but they fail at the end. And I think that we all know the bad consequences and what happened in the movie. So that is not a quality by design approach, I would say. And because today we are here to talk about quality and TMF, probably we need to start from the definition of quality. And I would like to share with you this quote from William Foster that say, "Quality is never an accident. It's always the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, and skillful execution." And if you're managing clinical trial, probably many of you think that sometimes when we manage clinical trial, it feels like we rely more on luck rather than a specific and defined strategy. But quality by design, competent authority, and as Paul said, even ICA-GCP are free, remind us that quality has to be something intentional. It is not, something, it's not luck. It has to be intentional, defined, and planned. Why? Why? Because we are managing clinical trial, and I think that the importance of quality probably is quite obvious for everyone. If we say quality, it's a synonym of ensuring patient safety, of data integrity. I mean, these are two pillars of GCP quality and of quality in general. So I think that if you say quality, you are referring to these two main pillars of clinical trial management, but it's also help to facilitate and to support regulatory compliance, because if we implement and if we add quality in our processes, we can reduce the risk of finding during audit and inspection. So it helps, our regulatory compliance. And it also has operational efficiency, because if we have robust and good quality processes, we can reduce errors, we can reduce mistakes, and we can even avoid delay and have the ability to make a faster decision during our clinical trial. So I think that we can move on, because yes, quality is important in clinical trial. And going back to dinosaurs, I think that it would have been more effective and efficient to think about the consequences and the risk of real dinosaurs in real world, rather than try to escape and survive when the dinosaurs are behind you. So I think that when it comes to quality, it's better, try to predict the issue and to avoid the issue rather than try to find and fix the issue. So quality by design is not is very far from having an error-proof process, because I think that clinical trials are so complex, so unique that it's almost impossible to predict everything that will happen. But we can implement and develop high quality processes that can help us to identify issue and quality finding before they escalate. So it's really, in my opinion, quality by design, a philosophical approach, a mindset to be proactive rather than reactive. This is something that the competent authority is asking us. I mean, they don't ask not to, to make errors, because we are human. I mean, in every clinical trial, there will be issue finding and errors, but we need to be more proactive and try to avoid, some small issue to become a big issue and risk. Because I think that when we talk about quality, the other element that we need to take into consideration is a risk. They're really strictly related. But risk is something that has the potential to occur. An issue is something that has occurred. So with quality by design and this quality approach, we need to try to avoid the risk to become an issue in our clinical trial and really try to identify the critical to quality factors for our clinical trial management. And obviously, I think that we all agree that the very first point and the very key element of a quality design or a quality management system in a company is processes, and so SOP. If we work in the clinical trial environment, we are all managing the SOP. We have hundreds of SOP and forms to be managed for managing the clinical trial. But these SOP, these processes can really support and enhance our quality management system and in general, the overall quality of the clinical trial. Because through SOP and through processes, we can improve the consistency. We can ensure that people are performing tasks and responsibility in the same way, avoiding risk and mistakes. We can improve risk management because we can minimize errors and potential risk with robust processes. And SOP are also very helpful when it comes to training and onboarding, because you can have already a well explained and defined process to be explained to new entry or to new study team member that can faster understand how the process is and what to do and what's the deliverable. And in one way, in one word, I would say that it increases efficiency, because with a robust and high quality process, we can reduce waste of time and resources to get the final result. So I think that definitely SOP is one key element for the quality of our quality management system, but also for the quality of our clinical trial. And when we think about processes, we know that in clinical trial there are lots of processes. Think about a regulatory submission. You have to prepare the submission dossier. There is a submission, and then the feedback from the competent authority, a formal approval or not, the correspondence, or when you have to activate a site, there is a specific process to follow. There are some records to be collected, to be verified before sending the investigational product to the sites. So there are specific steps to be followed to ensure the quality, to ensure that the process is in compliance with regulatory requirement. And one of these process is TMF. I mean, TMF management is one of the clinical trial management processes. But the most common issue and problem that I find is that sometimes this process is considered just at the end of the life cycle of the clinical trial. So people think about, okay, my TMF is inspection ready. Am I ready for a potential inspection when the TMF is closed? I mean, when the study is closed. But this is a big issue, a big problem, because with this kind of approach, that think about the TMF as something that just comes at the end of the trial. There's no way. I mean, you will fail inspection, you will fail any audit, because TMF has a specific life cycle that starts when the clinical trial life cycle starts. So it's really something that you need to manage since the very beginning of the clinical trial. And this is what Quality by Design is asking us. They ask for embedded quality since the very beginning. So if you want to have a TMF that is inspection ready, we can't wait for the end of the trial. We can't wait for the last steps of the process related to TMF closure. We need to think about the steps and the activity to be done since the very beginning. We need to plan and set up the TMF. We need to conduct and manage the TMF during the conduction of the clinical trial. So it's really, we need to embed the TMF management processes into the clinical trial management processes. Otherwise, again, quality will not be supported, will not be ensured, and so we will not be compliant with the regulatory requirement. So if we said that, obviously the setup of the TMF is a very, I would say, crucial, important step of the process, because it's when you set up the expectation, when you define, okay, what are the documents that I have to collect to be able to tell the story in case of an inspection, to demonstrate and give the evidence of my oversight, of my compliance, that I follow the regulation, the requirement. So the setup is very critical. But one of the major findings in clinical trial in TMF management is the TMF is not complete. So when an inspector comes and they check the TMF, essentially the major finding, or better, the critical finding, is that they are not able to reconstruct how the clinical trial was managed. And so the story is not complete, because there are some records that have not been filed or maybe not even produced. So to be able to define what are the records that need to be collected and uploaded or anyway managed in a trial master file is really essential, is really fundamental to have a TMF inspection ready or anyway of high quality. And so then I will say that a very big question is, okay, but how can I define this list of essential records to be collected? Well, we have ICA GCP E6R3. I think that you all know that the list of essential records been a little bit changed from R2 because it's organized in a different way. It includes more record type. I mean, it's already a more comprehensive list, but more comprehensive, we know, is the TMF reference model that probably Paul can say something on that, but definitely, I mean, the TMF reference model is working for version 4, so it's something that is trying to be more comprehensive rather than the regulation, to be even more supportive for industry, for companies that are looking for a guidance in identifying the list of essential records, because as we know, sometimes regulations are quite general, and so it's a sort of interpretation that we need to implement, and TMF reference model can definitely support that. But last and not least, we have our company SOP. I mean, at the end of the day, the company SOP, so our processes, the final outcome is a document, is a record. I mean, the evidence that we manage, that we did a particular activity, a particular process, is an artifact. Let's think about a monitoring visit. I mean, without a monitoring visit report, you can't provide the evidence that that monitoring visit occurred, what was done, who did. I mean, you need something. We know that if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And this is why, again, majority of the company SOP has as an outcome a specific record. And processes and record are interconnected, strictly interconnected. We need to think about the TMF as our storyteller for our clinical trial. And to have a good story, I think that we should have the narrative, so the processes, and the evidence, and so the artifact. These two elements need to work together to tell a good story. Otherwise, there will be some gaps, some missing piece, and for our inspection, it will be impossible to reconstruct how the clinical trial was conducted.
Hey, Donatella, I've got a question, or just a thought that's sort of coming to my mind. So obviously these three elements are super important, and they do need to interconnect. Obviously your SOPs have to reflect GCP, so ICH G6. Your TMF obviously has to hold the evidence that your SOPs are requiring you to produce, to demonstrate compliance with the regulation. But there's another thing that I'm thinking about, and that's all of the different plans within the study. Because the SOPs themselves are sort of fairly, they're like the generic process, right? They sort of go across studies, but then within each study, there can be specific processes or things you need to do, which are typically defined within the study plans. And so it'd be interesting to kind of almost merge those two things together. The SOPs and the study plans together give you all of the different processes that should be executed within this study, and all of the evidence that needs to be produced to demonstrate compliance, not only with the SOPs, but also the study plans that refer to them. So I almost feel that they kind of need to go together, and quite often, you always make that connection, I think, between the different study plans and the SOPs themselves.
Absolutely, totally agree. Because as you said, I think that company SOP, I mean, the SOP usually is it should cover all the study. But then we know that studies are unique, they have specific design, and so it's there that the study plan has a value, and obviously you can find other references, other important processes there in the content of the study-specific plan. So absolutely, it's something that must be matched and absolutely take into consideration when you try to identify, okay, what do I need to collect to provide the evidence of my oversight, monitoring, and all these processes. So I think that it's all clear at this point that where QMS meets TMF is SOP, as discussed before. So the outcome of an SOP, of a process describing an SOP, is majority of the time a record that must be collected and filed in the TMF to tell a piece of the story, to give the evidence that a clinical trial process was conducted as per regulatory requirement. But also SOP can provide parameters around what are require artifact and input for performing QC. For example, let's think about the TMF SOP for performing quality check. Let's say that a quality check must be performed after, let's say, 10 working days from indexing, and any query must be solved within 30 working days. I mean, all these parameters are contained in an SOP. And these parameters are usually in the SOP of the QMS, but have an impact on the TMF management. So these two aspects are strictly interconnected. You can also consider to think about what are the records produced based on a process model in your TMF. So majority of the TMF think about what are the records based on milestone and study stages. But let's think about more granularity and think about what are the records based on the clinical trial process, and so based on the SOP that in that moment I'm managing. So if I'm in the setup, I will have some SOP like the kickoff meeting, investigators meeting. I mean, all these processes can trigger the creation of records in this system. And we can also think about how to evaluate the compliance of my team compared to what's going on in the QMS and the TMF. So I will have some parameters defined for compliance in my SOP that can be checked through what's happening in the TMF. So these two, let's say, system really contains bidirectional information that needs to be exchanged between each other, because you have information about your study team in what's going on in the TMF, but you can also verify better the compliance defined in your QMS by checking the document in your TMF. And the other aspect is we know that one artifact important is the list of SOP in a study. And I mean, it's always a very rigid and I would say difficult record to be managed, because you need to manage the new version of an SOP, what's applicable for a study and what is not. So it's a very challenging record. But let's think that we can, have this dialogue between the two systems. And so this list of SOP will be a living document that will be easy to manage and update whenever it needed, because the two systems we speak to each other, basically. We'll be in integration, and so we will not be to create static and passive record that can be challenging to maintain updated, because we know that SOP can be updated, new version can be issued, and so they need to be maintained. And so again, there is this active and proactive approach that must be ensured for QMS, but also for TMF. I don't know, Paul, what do you think about this element?
So I have a million things going through my mind right now. That's correct. One thing that really strikes me is there's several things that strike me. First of all, I think why don't we, so from a technology standpoint, why don't we have a stronger connection between the quality management system and the trial master file, or the electronic trial master file? I've never actually seen organizations really connect these two things together, and I really feel that they should be connected together. We should be able to cross-reference from our quality system what are the records that we expect to produce within the trial master file. We should also, be able to generate that list of SOPs from our quality system, based on, for example, the training matrix that we define for the study, as well as any sort of, study-specific SOPs that we manage within the quality system as well. So I definitely think that there needs to be a closer connection between those two things. And we also need to think about, well, how do we communicate between those two systems? So is there a case for having sort of more of a standardized approach as well in terms of how we describe this information? And from there, I was also thinking about, digitization. And so right now we're about to sort of head into this very sort of transformative time where we're starting to see digital documents. And the first one will be digital protocols. So ICH M11 is coming. We're going to start to structure these very, very important procedural type documents in a digital format, which can then be exploited by various different systems downstream to be able to understand, well, how do I need to configure my system? How's this study going to be running? And I think this will expand to other sort of key documents and records within clinical trials, like CSRs and SAPs, those kinds of things. But also, I think that there's a good case for digitizing both the study plans and SOPs. You were talking about the parameters, so the SOPs and obviously by extension the plans have a lot of different parameters which describe how we're going to manage our study. And those parameters could be very, very useful if they were digitized, because we would be able to leverage them to drive how our systems are working. And this is, in relation to processes. So obviously within your SOPs, you're describing all of your different study processes with the parameters that go with them. That can drive things like, completeness. So when do we need to have certain records? When do activities on those records need to happen? And so I think that digitization is really going to open this up. But we also need to think about quality and TMF really being almost twins. They need to go together. The quality system defines what we should do, and the TMF presents what we did. And so they really do need to connect. And so I know that even from a CDISC TMF reference model standpoint, we're sort of thinking about, well, how can we collaborate more with the people on the quality side of things, with, like, for example, the Society of Quality Assurance. Is there collaborations that we can put together to start to connect the dots on these two areas, because they do really need to go together, especially as we sort of start down the journey of implementing ICH E6R3 and quality by design and critical to quality approaches. We can no longer work in silos between TMF and quality, in my opinion. That was a lot of
absolutely agree.
And then the thing that you brought out, which I thought was really super interesting around evaluating compliance, I think the more digital we are and the more connected these things are together, it's going to be a lot easier to identify compliance gaps. Yeah. So are people doing what they should be doing based on what's defined in the process? And if they are doing what they should be doing, we should be able to see the evidence. We should be able to see the evidence in the TMF. And as we sort of start to also, think about things like AI, we're going to be able to understand a lot more around the content of the TMF. So what's in the actual records that we're holding within the TMF, and exploiting that content to be able to evaluate compliance again, against the SOPs, against the study plans, but also against the protocol. And I think that, there's some really interesting feedback that quality assurance can start to get on what's going on in the TMF, which can then drive their sort of quality management activities and audits and things like that. I think today, when quality say, okay, well, we're going to do a TMF audit, I'm not sure if it's driven by specific factors, or if it's just, well, we always do an audit on the TMF 3 months into the study. So I think having sort of data-driven quality management is really something of the future, and I think it's gonna serve us well if we can put it in place, because we're going to be able to detect a lot of issues a lot sooner before we even get to the inspection. So for me, I feel what you're presenting is really very critical to our future success as an industry. Even. So. I'm talking now. What's it back to you?
No, I mean, you have already anticipated some other key interconnection element, I would say, because SOP is just one element of interconnection, but at the same time, we have other elements that represent a bridge between the two systems. For example, define the study-specific training matrix. We know that people need to be trained on SOP and on study plan as well, and other maybe study manuals before starting to manage a clinical trial activity. You talk about corrective and preventive action and audit. So I think there is a big interconnection between QMS and TMF when it comes to audit, because if we think about how to plan an audit, also in audit planning, we need to implement a risk-based approach. So we need to audit high risk But how can we know what is high risk? If we're not a study team member, so we don't know the clinical study, we don't know what's going on. I mean, it's quite challenging without having the data, without having the information. So this integration can really enhance quality management system to, develop an audit planning based on risk. And at the same time, when you have to close the circle of corrective and preventive action after an audit, I mean, majority of the time, the closure is the evidence of the corrective and preventive action, and this evidence, majority of the time, is within the eTMF. So at the end, what you're going to do is just duplication if you don't have integration between these two systems, because you have to reconcile document in one system and then in the other one. Then let's think about also inspection. There is inspection readiness, but there is also the other big concept, in my opinion, which is inspection preparation. When you prepare for inspection, one of the things that you should do is go back in the past and see and verify historical data. So what was checked, what was the findings. So all these data usually are in a QMS and not in the TMF. So these are other point of interconnection that if you can leverage, the integration between systems, that can be so powerful in having everything in one place, in one click. And same for change control. Probably they are not very frequent in a clinical trial, but it can happen. Change control, like for example, a department that changed and was reorganized during the middle of a clinical study, or a CRO that was changed. There can be some events that have an impact and that are managed through a change control, usually in a QMS. But those events tells a story, tells more detail about what happened in the study. And so having those details, having that story, the TMF available right away, it will help you so much to understand what's going on. Yeah. And the other aspect that you mentioned before was the compliance. So yes, you can check the compliance with your processes, with your parameter, but you can also check with this integration what is not covered. Because theoretically, we should have a process, so an SOP or a working instruction for everything, literally everything. And sometimes the part of the improvement of a quality management system is try to understand what is not covered by an SOP. So probably I need to work on that process, because if it's not covered, I don't have something to ensure consistency and quality in my company. So I need to work on that specific process not covered by an SOP.
So I think if there was sort of evidence within the TMF, so we have like records or artifacts.
Yes, indeed.
Click to an SOP, then it's like, okay, well, what's governing this? So I think that's a really good point, because I'm sure that happens, right? And then you inspection type say, well, what governs this particular area? And it's like, we're not sure.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that, all these elements together, if we are able to see this bidirectional relationship, can really transform TMF into a dynamic system, an agile system, and not just a repository or a passive archive, because it will be really a source of precious data that can enhance your quality management system. And at the same time, the quality management systems can support the oversight, the better oversight of the TMF. So, two systems, two sources of precious data that combined together can really be a game changer. And just to give you a practical example, let's think about a protocol deviation or a serious breach that occur at a site. Obviously, it's a quality issue that needs to be managed, and majority of the time you have your SOP to manage and to assess the serious breach or the protocol deviation. So you have all this process, but this process have an impact on the TMF, because if there is a protocol deviation or a serious breach or anyway a quality issue at a site, that will impact the risk score of that site, because probably, it will be a higher risk site if there are lots of protocol deviation. And at the same time, those protocol deviation are the evidence of a process of an event that must be filed within the records of the TMF reference model or the TMF. And it also represents some historical data for eTMF QC. So you can leverage this data, this information within the eTMF to understand what TQC and how to apply a risk-based approach. So all these data are lesson learned for improvement from a quality perspective, but also on to manage more strategically and more proactively your TMF, thanks to this data. But as you said, I think that we can be very fast on this slide because you have already anticipated that, unfortunately, the current situation is that these two systems, they work in silos. So, I mean, they're really separated, the two different worlds, I would say, two different universes. So this will bring to increase the risk because information are spread in different systems. It will obviously lead to manual and redundant processes and also manual effort to try to reconcile all the information and all the records. And you will not have real-time oversight and capability of monitoring if this information are in different systems that are managed with different processes, not having a direct and immediate access to this information and data. So I think that we have already spoiled all the benefit of this integration. It can be really a game changer having these two system integration to support the inspection readiness because you will have access to data and to more information in a quickly and easy way. You can also enhance your operational efficiency and having high quality processes, and you can support a more proactive approach and compliance. And this is a requirement. So, I mean, we need to implement this proactive philosophy and this proactive mindset. And I think that, yeah.
Maybe sad thing to that as well, Donatella. So I think that definitely proactive is super important. And I think that the clinical teams and the TMF teams really need to be sort of thinking a lot about their relationship with QA and vice versa. And as we know with ICH E6R3, it's all about critical to quality and defining what is critical to quality. Within a process, but also critical to quality within a study. And I think that if we could have better integration between the quality system and the TMF and having QA already sort of evaluating the processes that are being defined within the quality system and classifying them, so this is, we feel that this is very critical to quality, whereas this is less critical to quality. And then providing that input to the clinical teams who can then also adjust based on the specific study and use that information to drive their risk assessments. In part, risk assessment involves many different factors, but I think this is one of them. And I don't think it necessarily happens today. And I think that there's an opportunity here to work much more closely with QA around the processes, or maybe even have regulatory people involved as well who can sort of evaluate and identify within the regulations that we're trying to comply with. What are the critical areas here, and really give that input. I think it could be very useful for the clinical teams when they start to put together their risk-based approach for a particular study. So I think let's try and work more closely and really gain the benefit that each group has, to be able to achieve this requirement that we have for, taking a critical to quality approach.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, I think that these two words needs to start to communicate proactively and, to define a better and more efficient strategic planning and management of the TMF, but also of the quality of the clinical trial itself. So again, going back to reality right now, we can do an integration between the two systems, but it's manual, because if you have a look to the TMF reference model, there is this fantastic column, suggesting column for implementing the TMF reference model where you can add your SOP reference. But yeah, it's something manually, it takes a lot of time, and at the end, it remains in a spreadsheet. So my wish, my idea of integration is really something that Paul has anticipated with, and AI integration. So I really dream about, an integration where AI will almost predict, an issue before becoming, before escalate, or a trend before becoming a real finding. So have these two systems integrated with AI capable of analyzing thousands and thousands of data and information and trends in a quickly way, and show us these reports, these results with customized reports, customized dashboard that can immediately go, under our attention and see, okay, this is where I need to audit, this is where I need to monitor it, this is where I need to do oversight. I mean, giving us all the results of big analysis that nowadays we can do, but they are manual and it takes a lot of time and resources. So AI will be really an assistance in giving us the data that are relevant for implementing this proactive approach, and it will enable us to define a better strategy for quality and for TMF management. So I think that this is my last slide, because I just want to summarize a little bit what is quality by design, that I think is not just a methodology, it's a mindset. So I think that we need to create a culture that is embedding quality into every single step of the clinical trial and also of your TMF since the very beginning. So don't wait for the end. As Paul said, we need to involve a different stakeholder, and QA people are other stakeholders that need to be involved to have a more holistic approach. And we need to identify what are the critical to quality factors in our TMF management, because not everything has the same weight. And so we need to focus as competent authority, and especially R3 is telling us only on what really matters, on what has an impact on the credibility of our study outcome and data. So, Paul, you want to add something?
No, I think you really covered it, but I do want to ask some questions, if that's okay.
Good.
We have questions, and we've only got a few minutes to answer them. So I think you summed that up very well. But I think what I'm getting from this mainly is it's really important that we start collaborating a lot more with the quality team. And this is a joint effort. It really is. And somebody actually put a really nice comment, Barbara. A close and great cooperation with clinical QA is crucial for TMF. Sharing knowledge and experience, cookies and coffee, as well as love, desperation is the key. I like that. We should be working together. We shouldn't see QA as something that blocks us. We should see QA as an enabler to help us achieve our goals. But I do have a couple of questions from the audience. The first question from Jess: Are the suggested columns planned to be incorporated in the TMF reference model template? So I think you may be referring to, well, there are two things I think you're referring to: either sort of referencing your procedures, your SOPs, which I think already within the template today, I believe there's already a column that you can use to do that.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really good idea, because for one, it allows you to sort of identify gaps, but also it sort of makes a clear connection between the evidence that you're collecting and the procedures. I think as we move into more sort of digital, obviously we want to make these connections within the systems themselves, and be able to visualize, for example, from an SOP, well, all of the evidence that's been produced, and maybe identify evidence that's missing that we should have, So I definitely, I think from a risk standpoint, the reference model, especially with all of the comments that we received for V4, there's a lot of people asking, are you going to sort of provide, standard risk classifications and things like that? Unfortunately, it's a very attractive idea, but risk is really it's in the eye of the beholder. So each organization is different, each study is different, and people's and organizations' tolerance for risk is different. And so I don't think we can sort of come up with a one size fits all. when it comes to risk management. But we are sort of providing a framework for risk management. So these are the things you should be thinking about. But I don't think we will ever have a formal sort of classification record by record of, what we think the risk level should be. That really is something that you need to do within your own organization. There's another question. So our ETMF is not integrated with our quality system. How can I get started with a quality by design approach? So Donatella, what would be the first things you would do if you're just getting started with this? What should we be looking at?
I start with the SOP mapping. I think that is the very initial and the fundamental step to be done, because majority of the company, I know that, they know their SOP as a list, but it's not a list. You have to really visualize this SOP as a process map, try to identify what are the steps that are not covered, what comes before one step rather than the other. I mean, really even have a chronological order of these steps and try to identify, okay, what are the high risk or high quality processes that have an impact on my trial. And if the record is missing, probably will not be able to show the evidence to an inspector. So I would say that SOP, or anyway, processes mapping, is the very initial step. And then everything follows.
Go from there. Exactly. I agree. We had another question around the use of bots and AI and the advancements in the future. What do we see as advancements in the future? I think that right now we are using AI within ETMF, but we're using it primarily for things like indexing, duplicate detection, those kinds of things. So very operational things. And I think we're really just at the beginning of using AI and bots for more sort of analytics type functions. What I do think could be interesting is being able to use AI to detect anomalies, things that just don't quite make sense, just by looking at the data that we have. And I think the AI is actually very good at doing this kind of thing. So detecting those outliers or things that just don't quite make sense. And I think that, we have a lot of data. And so we could start to train these bots to look at historical data, look at, the current study, the quality system, the processes, what should be expected, and then start to try and detect, well, we feel that there's maybe a problem here or here, just to give us the pointers. I still feel that there needs to be human oversight as well. I don't think we can trust everything to AI, but we should be using it as a tool to point us in the right direction. And this is sort of combined with all of the other approaches that Donatella outlined today in her presentation. So we do have time, I think, for another couple of questions. So there's one that's, are there plans to map the TMF reference model to ICH E6R3? And obviously we were talking about mapping to SOPs. There is going to be an initiative where we start to look at Appendix C of R3 and start to map the reference model one-to-one to that appendix. So there should be a direct correlation. Also, there was just a very quick question. Obviously, I'm promoting CDISC as well at the same time there. Can we contribute, get involved with digitization of the TMF reference model by CDISC? Absolutely. Go on the CDISC website, submit your applications, be a volunteer, and then we can reach out to you and get you involved in one of the initiatives. All right. I think with that, we've pretty much got to the end of our questions. So I would like to, first of all, say thank you very much to Donatella for giving us such an insightful vision. A lot of really good ideas, a lot of really good things to be thinking about there as we move into this sort of data-driven, quality-driven environment within TMF, which is very exciting. I'd also like to make just a few announcements. So TMF Week is back again. So I believe we're on our fourth or fifth season of our sixth season. I'm getting a cue here from my marketing team. So sixth season, can't believe it's already been 6 years. That seems like a long time. But it's a great conference for beginners and also for very experienced TMFers. We've got a lot of great presenters again this year. It runs over a 5-day period. It's 100% virtual and is 100% free. You don't have to pay to attend. And we have around 25 speakers again for you this year. And each year we typically have around 2,000 attendees. So it's really one of the biggest events in the industry for TMF. You can also meet people. There are meeting rooms. Yeah, there's a really good place to sort of make connections. And if you're just beginning your career, there's also this year a special day for beginners where you can ask questions to very experienced TMF people about how they sort of got to where they are and get advice from them as well as to where you should be going to move into the TMF world or move up the ladder within your career. So do register. For those that register and attend, you will also get a certificate of attendance, which you can put into your resume. You can post it on LinkedIn. You can make some yours. Also, just a quick plug as well, for those of you who haven't yet registered, there's the CDISC Interchange in Geneva next month in May. Really looking forward to that. It is running, I believe, 13th and 14th of May in Geneva, just next to the airport, very easy to get to. And there's going to be a lot of really, really good talks, a lot of announcements happening with V4. There's a lot of movement. So definitely a conference that you should be at. So go for it. It's the only conference as well this year in Europe on TMF. So please register. It's not very expensive and it's a really, really good event. So with that, I am going to say thank you to all of you for spending close to an hour with us talking about TMF and quality. Hopefully, you're as passionate about it as we are. If you've got any questions or thoughts that come to you after this session, feel free to reach out to Donatella or myself. We'll be happy to engage with you on LinkedIn. And look forward to speaking to you again very soon for our next session of TMF Week and State of TMF. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the State of TMF. If you liked today's episode, hit the subscribe button, view the full episode with video on YouTube, and follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook to see the sometimes entertaining and always resourceful content we post every single day. See you at the next episode.